Why don't you first maybe start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, so I'm originally from Sarnia. I lived there for like 29 years. I was actually a personal support worker and in my first year of nursing before I got into trouble. I started with an addiction to not oxys, Percocets first. When I was 19, I got my wisdom teeth out and I really liked them, and that turned into abusing oxys, and then that turned into abusing fentanyl. And then I got my first charge when I was 26, and it was downhill after that.
Hmm. So you were charged for possession or?
I've been arrested 5 times. So possessions, and then my last one was trafficking, and that's where I went to the pen for that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and oh my God, I'm about to sneeze. I'm gonna stop myself. Okay, I'm okay. Sorry about that. And so, I mean, tell me about your experiences. So, I mean, first of all, I mean, I'm new to this, and so I'm gonna assume that there are people in the audience who are new to this too. There's a difference between jail and prison, and
Yes.
you've been to both.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, tell me about your experiences in both jail and prison and kind of what the differences are.
Okay. So jail is provincial, and that is 2 years less a day. So if you've been charged and you're awaiting bail, you go there. We call them remands or detention centers. They're just a warehouse and they store people until they're sentenced. And then federal is prison, and that's when you have 2 years plus a day. So there's a big difference between the way they operate because with jail, like provincial, it's automatically max because you're not classified. Whereas there's different security levels for prison, so they base your security classification off. So they actually like interview your family and get to know your past, your trauma, why you committed your crime, and then they'll look at your institutional behavior and how much you own up to your crime or take responsibility of it in order to classify you, and then you'll go to either minimum, medium, or maximum in prison. So it's actually kind of harder to do your time in provincial because you're in cells with bars. You're locked down a lot. So in Sarnia, we have 4 cells on the female side. There's 8 beds, but there's usually 12 of us, and
Hmm.
it's about a 6 by 7 cell.
So there's
So,
8 beds and there's 12 people in the cell. So how does that work
so it's
out?
it's 3 per cell. One sleeps on the floor,
Oh, okay.
and they sleep so that their bottom half of their body is under the bed, and then their head is right beside the toilet. So their head's right there when you're going to the bathroom or changing your tampon. Like there's nowhere to get privacy or move.
Brutal. And what do you do with your days?
Well, when you're locked down, you sit in your cell and you can't move anywhere because there's 3 of yous in there. So there's nothing to do in provincial. Most of the time when we're locked down, they don't let programs happen. Programs don't even happen anyways. But we watch TV and listen to music. And play cards.
Hmm.
That's all there is to do. What else is there to do?
Hmm. And what? So the women that you were in prison with or in jail with, what were those women like? What were their experiences like? What were their commonalities?
So it's interesting. Before I had my experience with jail or prison, I thought that everyone was like a monster that was in prison. Like they're all like, murderers and evil people. And then I get there and I find out like 80% of the women that are in there are all in on drug related charges.
Hmm.
Oh, they're normal people. We did normal things. Like a lot of the women never had like role models in their life, so they didn't know how to cook. So we did a lot of like teaching the younger ones how to cook, and um, I was a jail mom to a lot of the younger girls.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a different experience in prison compared to in provincial.
And, did you find that a lot of those women had trauma in their past or abuse, more so than perhaps the regular female population?
Yes, so these stats are kind of outdated, but the last ones I looked at were 68% had a history of sexual abuse, whereas 86 had a history of physical abuse. And then if you look at more marginalized groups of people like Indigenous women, those stats are even higher.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them have received any like counseling or trauma. Like they get high to numb the pain. And that's what I did. I had a lot of trauma and I always had to be the caregiver and take care of my younger sisters and my mom. Like I lost my childhood and I couldn't, I bottled everything because I had to be okay to take care of everyone else. And if I was falling apart, then I was no good to anybody else. And then that caught up with me in my older years. I started using drugs to numb all my hurt and all my pain. And unfortunately, my drug of choice is super expensive. So I had to sell it to other addicts in order to make mine for free so that I wasn't sick.
Right.
And seems to be a reoccurring theme with a lot of the incarcerated women.
Yeah, and my understanding is generally that, particularly marginalized women, well, marginalized people, but in the case of women's prisons and jails, they're overrepresented. So Indigenous women are overrepresented, things like that. Obviously, poor women.
Yeah, so at Grand Valley, Indigenous women make up over 40% of our population. But if you go to like our prison in Saskatchewan, it's actually like 98%. Like that, those
Wow.
are like staggering statistics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, I mean, and then what are you treated like in prison? How is your relationship to the guards?
We don't have relationships with the guards. And I'm not going to say they're all the same because out of all the times that I have been in, I've met some really nice guards who have treated me with respect, but a majority of them, it's power and control, right? They get a thrill out of just treating you like garbage, making you feel like you're not human. And they only look at you like your crime. They don't get to know you as a person. And a lot of people have stigma around addiction as well. So they're like, you're a waste of space. Like it's really dehumanizing being in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, of course, that I wanted to talk to you about, because you've been one of the only people doing work around this issue. You've also been doing really good work around this issue, is this thing that, I feel like we've only begun to talk about, even though I believe it's been going on for a few years, which is that men are being transferred into female prisons if they identify as transgender. So, I mean, how long has this been going on for, first of all?
So actually Ontario was the very first province in Canada to allow it, and they started allowing it in January 2015 before the passing of Bill C-16. And then BC was the second province to allow it to happen. So my first encounter with a self-identifying male or female was March 30th, 31st, 2015. So I was in Windsor jail, and they have a direct supervision and an indirect supervision range. So direct supervision means the guards are on range with you. Indirect supervision is like normal jail. The guards are not on range with you. You have a tiny little pod with a couple cells. So they used to have the men that identify as female in the indirect by themselves, away from the women. But I had the laundry job, and I would leave range to go to laundry every day, and I would see, actually, they went by Chris. That's their normal name. They were fully functioning male, went by Chris, like Christopher.
Were they, but I mean, was he, like, how did he end up getting transferred to female prison in the first place? And, you know, if he's not, I mean, if he's just Chris and he's a male, like, what's the process there?
So what we've seen a lot of is anyone that has skin beefs, that's what we call, it's a jail term. So if you have like pedophile charges or rape charges against women, then you are going to get beat up on the male side. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? That just, you have those charges, that's what happens. So we found that a lot of them that had those type of charges would say, I'm in fear of my safety, I'm not going on the male side, I identify as female, and refuse to go to the male side. And that was the case with Chris too. All his charges were to do with harming women and being really, really sick. So that's why they put him there. And at first the female guards were strip searching because he identified as female. And he kept getting hard-ons every time they would strip search him. So they said, absolutely not. We are not doing this. And at that point in time, it was before the passing of Bill C-16, so they could refuse. They can no longer refuse now. It is up to the inmate. They have a specialized protocol. So if they request to be strip searched by female guards only, then the female guards have to do it.
And this is a direct result of C-16?
Yes. They get individual prioritized treatment, whatever. I can't remember exactly what it's called. But I got into a fight, and they handcuffed me and put me over in the indirect supervision range. And he was in the cell beside me. And they told me to start stripping, like strip searching. And another guard came over and pulled Chris out of the cell. And as I was taking my clothes off, he stopped outside of my cell and looked at me. And the guard had to grab him and drag him away. And I was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, I feel so violated. On top of being strip searched and getting naked in front of you, I now have this person who has skin beefs staring at me getting undressed. Like, so that was my first experience. I didn't realize I was in when they passed Bill C-16, and I didn't really know what it was about. I didn't realize that I'm from a small city. We don't have a whole lot of trans people. Until jail, I never even met one. So when I ended up getting transferred to Grand Valley, as soon as I got there, the women warned me about Judy, who, so Judy's been in the prison system since 1974, was a man his whole life, and then decided was going to be a female and got the surgery. And they're like, stay away from
Can I ask a question quick? So Judy, did he, so he obviously got the surgery while he was in prison. Did the government pay for that, or how did he pay for that?
So Judy got out for like 8 months and got the surgery. But I wouldn't be surprised if the government didn't pay for it because he was on parole. So he's still CSC's client.
Well, yeah, and it's quite an expensive, I mean, it's more than one surgery, so it's expensive to get all of those surgeries. So it would be odd for somebody in that position to be able to afford such a thing, but who knows?
And you know what's really crazy is CSC denies, so when you get out on parole, you're put into a halfway house or a rehab. You're not allowed to get HST, GST. You're not allowed to go on welfare or ODSP. You get $4.10 a day from CSC for allowance. So that's $28.70 a week. They're supposed to pay for medical, but they don't. So we're not allowed to get birth control on day parole because CSC says it's not a necessity. But then they'll pay for double D implants for Terra de Souza.
Okay.
Wrap your mind around
interesting. That. I wonder if they would also pay for breast implants for women.
No.
To affirm their gender.
No. Or reductions for the women that are in
right,
so
and
much
that
pain.
actually is a health issue in many cases, right?
Yeah, no, it doesn't happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
so Judy got the surgery, came back to prison.
A female prison. So when I went there, I was warned right away, stay away, pervert, will harass you, make disrespectful comments to you. Because I was blown away. I'm like, why is there a guy here? And they're like, oh, that's not a guy. Like, that's Judy. And Judy actually has the surgery and is a female. And I'm like, that's a guy. And Judy would even say, I'm man from waist up and I am female from waist down. And my mind will never be not a male's.
Right.
So, and harassed all of us, used to harass me all the time, be like, hey, you, come here, can you walk by this way again so I can watch your ass? Like, just comments all the time. Another one of my friends, Judy, forced himself onto her and kissed her. She charged him. He was sent to SEG for 3 days, and then they let him out and put him into the SLE, which is structured living environment where people that have a lot of mental health issues are. So they brought him out of SEG and put him in with the most vulnerable people in the entire prison. Yeah.
And then were there more incidents?
Yeah, so there's been, I did most of my time, like I got 3 years, I did 17 months in, but I did most of mine in provincial by the time I got transferred to federal. But yeah, there's other issues with other inmates, and there's been a lot more since I've been out, because I still have a lot of friends that are inside, but Harks has just been terrorizing the women.
Right, that was one that I wanted to ask you about. So Marilyn Hart, as he's been reported on in the media, I mean, tell me about him.
So
it is Marilyn, right? Did I get that right? Marilyn?
It's Madeline.
Madeline, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay, Madeline Harks.
Every single place that Harks has been, he's left a victim in his wake. So he's been to Fraser Valley.
And what is he in for, first of all?
So his first charges ever were molesting a 4 and 5-year-old little girl, and he actually got a conditional sentence on that. Unbelievable. And then out on bail, after he just kept doing everything, out on bail, he went after women that were not not all mentally there. They were a lot younger. But he has over 200 crimes against women and children. He just keeps the exact same criminal behavior, the same offense path over and over. And they just keep transferring him around. So he'll have an incident at Fraser Valley, they'll let him out. He'll go to Anderson Lodge in Vancouver, he'll have an incident there, they'll send him back. And then they'll transfer him to Grand Valley. He has an incident there, transfer him to another female halfway house. He literally has something in every single one. And the fact that the parole board continues to let him out is unbelievable. There's no change in his behavior. So why are you letting him out when he's a high risk to reoffend?
Why are they letting him out?
Exactly. I would like an answer to that.
Yeah. So, and does he have the surgery, or, how long has he been identifying as a woman?
So I believe he started identifying in 2014. Yes, had the surgery, which just goes to show, because a lot of people say, well, if they have the surgery, then they should be allowed in female prisons. Well, no, Harks has the surgery. Male behavior and impulses do not leave if you have the surgery, and that is quite evident with this person. Mm-hmm. And even with Judy.
Yeah. So what Harks is doing is he's continuing to, is he assaulting people, harassing, I assume, what are these incidents that are happening?
So a lot of it is harassment, grooming type behaviors. Also, he assaulted an inmate at Grand Valley in the washroom. She was taken out from Grand Valley to the hospital, the sexual assault clinic inside the hospital, to be assessed. So there is a police report for that. The police didn't pursue any charges. It is in his parole board decision of 2019 that took place. Nothing has come out of it. They didn't even offer her counseling or anything. And it's funny because it's not funny, but CSC doesn't offer trauma counseling or any sort of counseling for any of these issues. So then when you're triggered or you've had a traumatic event happen and you act out, their solution is to put you into segregation, which causes more harm. Mm-hmm. This woman was just assaulted. Why is she in segregation? It doesn't make any sense.
Awful. Yeah. There was another one that I wanted to ask you about. His name is John Boothe. I don't know how to say his last name. Do you know who I'm talking about? You do, I guess.
I know who you're talking about. I can't say it right either.
Okay.
So he put in a request, which is crazy because he evaded police for 13 years and he made 2 serious escape attempts while in male institutions. So the first time he managed to have saws and he cut the restraints off of him and hopped off the back of the transfer bus and they caught him. 2 years later, he had homemade tools and he cut the bars off his cell and made like a 35-foot rope to escape and a guard caught it. Anytime he is escorted by 2 armed guards. So armed guards with guns.
Wow.
Because that's how much of a high-risk escapee he is. Mm-hmm. So he put in a request saying he wanted to go to a female institution, and CSC said, no, we can't maintain the security needed to keep him confined, right?
When was this that he made the request?
So I know that it went before the judge in August, and that's when the decision was made. So I'm assuming that it was prior. Obviously, it was prior, but yeah, the judge overruled the decision and said no. He identifies as female. He goes to a female institution, even though a female institution does not have enough security to keep him from escaping. Like, did the judge not take into consideration the community? Like, CSC is supposed to be protecting the community. That's why they're incarcerating these people, apparently, right?
Right.
Did the judge not take into consideration that with the elevated escape risk that he's not going to be in a community and harm somebody?
What is he in for?
Murder. Like, does the community not even play a part into this decision? It's just, well, he just self-identifies, so out the door with everyone's safety. Mm-hmm. So we can accommodate a feeling.
Yeah. And I mean, so these kind of incidences are going on. I think it sounds like pretty regularly. And, you know, for the most part, much of the media hasn't been reporting on it. You know, they have been reporting on it a little bit here and there, I think in like the Toronto Sun. But it's hard to find information about this stuff really at all. Why? I mean, have you talked to the media about any of this? What's your experience been like in terms of trying to get this information out there?
So I've talked to probably about 9 reporters. They'll show interest at first. They'll get a whole bunch of information from me, and then they just drop off the face of the earth. And then Brad Hunter from Toronto Sun reached out to me, and I went and met him, and I'm like, are you actually going to run the story? Because, like, I'm kind of sick of just repeating myself over and over again and nothing happening. And I was surprised, but he ran the story. So that is the only media source that has actually run the story. And then I wrote an article about it all and posted that too. But other than that, there's nothing reported on it. Nobody will report on it.
Why do you think that is?
Well, most people are in denial, or they say, well, you can't paint them all with the same paintbrush, and by you talking about these people doing this crime, then everyone thinks every trans is the same.
Right.
So do we remain silent and help facilitate the abuse on women because not all of them are the same? Or do we come up with a solution to stop these predators from piggybacking off the loopholes in the policy?
Right. And I mean, the reality is that it's not that people are saying that and people who identify as trans are any different than anyone else. What we're saying is that men are dangerous to women, and these men in particular who are being transferred into female prisons are particularly dangerous to women because, as you've explained, like the reasons that they would want to transfer to a female prison is because they've committed these crimes that make them even more vulnerable in a male prison to violence, and there's already, tons of violence in men's prisons.
Yeah, and the statistics too, like Kelly, the former deputy commissioner of women, stated that 50% of the requests coming from male institutions are convicted sex offenders. The entire overall population of male prisoners, only 20% are sex offenders.
Right.
So we have 50% coming in, like,
yeah.
It's crazy. And then I'll hear, oh, well, women are too, and there's women on women violence. 2% of the overall population of women have convicted sex offenses, and pretty much all of them are for facilitating access to a victim.
Right, yeah. So that's the thing that's different about these female criminals versus the male ones, is that generally, as I understand it, when women are involved in, sexual crimes, sexual abuse crimes, it's, led by, instigated by a man, or she's, in an abusive relationship with a man and he sort of draws her into his abuse. Like, is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, well, they've never actually had, it's never happened. A woman has never broken into another woman's house and raped her. They've never had it. How many men have done that? Women and men's crimes, they're different, completely different. And also, since in 1990, when they had the inquiries into the Kingston prison for women, they did a federally task force for women and made a report creating choices. They came to the conclusion that women are different from men. Imagine that. Mm-hmm. So then they started making programs and making the environment different, because women do not need high security. We don't escape. We're not dangerous like the men are. Mm-hmm. The why we commit crimes are different than the way men commit crimes. So a lot of our programming is based on how to be assertive, because women are not assertive. They allow people to take advantage of them. They don't know how to say no. They lack boundaries. That's what a lot of our programming is. Right. So now we have these self-identified females who committed their crimes as men coming into the female institution and being taught how to set boundaries and be assertive. Do men need to be taught how to be assertive?
Yeah.
Should I say murderers and pedophiles?
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's so interesting because, of course that's true. We know how female socialization is different than male socialization. But then on top of that, I would expect that problem of lacking boundaries, not knowing how to say no or be assertive would be exacerbated in prison, because these are women who've been abused so much in their lives and who are so marginalized. So they've just become, they're women who've never been allowed to have boundaries, or their boundaries have been ignored their whole lives. Yep.
No, there's a lot of issues that weren't planned out when they passed this bill. Mm-hmm. Like everything that we fought for, there were 7 suicides at prison for women within a 3-year span. 6 of them were Indigenous women. Mm-hmm. They said that P4W, prison for women, wasn't fit for bears, never mind women. That is huge. And we made so many changes, and now with the influx of sex offenders and murderers and max security, super max security, dangerous offenders coming from the male institutions, the guards unit, our union, is requesting an increase in security. So they want 40 millimeter gas launchers. They want to be able to have firearms. These are things that are not needed for women that we got rid of, and now they want to bring them back in.
Right.
So we're going to lose our mother-child program. You cannot raise children with guards walking around with guns. Like.
Right. And what does the Canadian government have to say about all this?
Well, you know what's interesting? In order for me to get my parole, I had to own up to my crime. Not only did I have to acknowledge my crime, I had to acknowledge my victims. So not just my primary victims, but my secondary victims. And I had to acknowledge that through any physical, emotional, spiritual, or financial harm that I had caused them. And then I had to take responsibility for my crime and show accountability in order to be released to the society. Where is the government or CSC doing any of that? They mandate us to do that to get parole, but then they don't do it themselves. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, there's no accountability. I mean, I've heard nothing from the Canadian government about... I mean, I don't think that the Canadian government even told the public that they were making this decision to let men into women's prisons. I think they just went ahead and did it. Is that right? You know, I didn't... Well, there was no press release.
Yeah, I honestly, if they did, it wasn't done properly. And they weren't truthful about who was requesting. Like, self-ID doesn't work in that situation at all. And not even the reassignment surgery for some of them. Like, look at Harks. Clearly, Harks should not be around women and children, period, ever. I don't care what he identifies as. He is a complete monster and victimizes everyone. Like, I just don't care. I don't care what you identify as. You do not deserve to be around women and children, period. And I don't think, well, I know people weren't aware until I started speaking out about it. Everyone was like, what? Even my own family and friends. They're like, what do you mean? They're not told.
And so, and there's, you know, I'm wondering what organizations in Canada that are supposed to be advocating for, you know, marginalized women in prisons are saying like this, like, you know, Women's Legal Education Action Fund, LEAF, EFRI, you know, these are the charities and the organizations that are supposed to be, you know, somebody has to be advocating for these women who practically have no rights, who are incredibly marginalized, who've suffered much of their lives, you know. What are they doing? What are they saying about this?
Well, LEAF denounced your event at Toronto Public Library.
Right, right.
Yes. So did Elizabeth Fry. And also, EFRI on, like, the mainland, like the East Coast, they had a panel that helped explain and show you how to proceed with getting trans women into women's prisons. I've talked to staff at my local EFRI. I've been called transphobic. I've been told that I needed to be educated, that trans women are women.
Yeah, you're the one that needs to be educated.
Yes, I am.
The person who has experienced it firsthand.
Yes. It's sad because I really looked up to EFRI and CAFES. They're who got me to start advocating, to start speaking out. I used to speak on panels for them. When I got out of prison, I went to rehab for 3 months, and then I went to EFRI for 4. And I thought they were a great organization. And then I went to their Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry conference in Ottawa this past June. And actually the woman that filed the grievance that I have posted all online, she got up and spoke to them and told them that story about her trauma and everything. And she was dismissed, called transphobic, and told she needed to be educated. And that's when I was like, you know what? No, not going to happen. If I have to speak out myself, then I will. But somebody needs to advocate for these women. And not at the expense of them for appearing to be inclusive, because they didn't need to have an open door policy. They could have put policies in place that still protected the women, but helped trans women as well. But they didn't. They left it as an open door policy.
What would those policies be? I mean, what would be the alternative? I mean, I have my own idea about what the alternative should be, but what do you think?
Well, just for one, to listen to the women instead of shutting them down. Like, they totally, like, pushed us out. Like, if we don't agree with their open policy, then we're just transphobic. But they could have put so that women still remained, like, biological women still remained their number one,
Right.
you know? So that if there was a conflict, so if a woman was assaulted, that they would obviously choose the biological woman over the trans woman who just assaulted her.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, couldn't they, I don't know, I mean, couldn't they just keep these men who identify as trans in men's prisons but separate them from the other men? I mean, I don't know what the middle ground would be, but certainly it's not a middle ground to be putting them into prisons and jails with women. So I don't know. I mean, it's like, and I mean, particularly because these are men, these are dangerous men, sexual predators, men who molested kids. I mean, it's hard to be like, okay, well, like, too bad. Like, why do your rights precede women's rights? I mean, it's just, why are you the priority here? Like,
it kind of blows my mind. And a lot of people say, well, it's too dangerous. Like, they can't be in men's prisons. How long have they been in men's prisons for? They've got a long fine. Even the deputy commissioner stated only 1 or 2 of the requests cite safety concerns. The rest are because they want to move to align with their identity.
Okay.
So it's not like all these transfers are coming in for safety. That's not the case. Right? So, and I don't know what they're going to do, but they need to do something because this is not working. I've been starting a few things. Hopefully they go through, but one of the things, a journalist reached out to me and wanted me to collect women's stories about being in, and she wanted to do an article on their experience, their personal experience. And I want to start collecting affidavits from them as well to pursue with a human rights complaint against CSC. But in the meantime, I'd like to work on a moratorium. So that is to have CSC stop the transferring until they can come up with a solution that provides safety.
Right. Okay.
So
I did want to ask you, because I know that, so when I talk to people about this issue and, explain that if you're putting men in prison with women, there's a high chance there's going to be violence. And they'll respond and say, oh, well, there's violence that happens in women's prisons. Women are violent towards other women in prison too. So, there's violence anyway. So what difference does it make if you put a man in there who might be violent? Do you get that? Like, how do you respond?
Well, yeah, but usually it is due to confinement. So, like, if you're in like I was saying, so if you're in a 6 by 7 foot cell with 2 other women, who's not going to fight? You have no room, right? So it's usually a product of the environment. Or, for one, look at the size of a man compared to the size of us. So you're telling me that a woman fighting a woman is the same as a 5'1", 110-pound woman fighting a 6'2", 250-pound trans woman? Double their size, double their height. Like, it is not the same. And men are raping the women. They're assaulting them. A biological woman does not have a penis, and she's not in there raping women with her penis. Like, you can't even compare the two.
Yeah. I mean, it seems obvious to me, but man, a lot of people will make those arguments. It's like people have, completely forgotten that there are very clear, important differences between men and women.
Yeah, I've done a total of 27 months, and I've been in one fight. And that's because we were locked down all the time in confined space, and there was nowhere for us to go, and we just got on each other's nerves. Like,
Yeah, fair enough. And so I I mean, I guess because so much of this is due to Bill C-16, do you think that there's any recourse? I mean, is the only answer, or the only answer that would truly be successful, would that be to repeal Bill C-16? Are there other ways around this? Are there no laws in Canada that protect women's spaces, in spaces where women are vulnerable, like in prison? I mean, do women in prison have no rights?
It appears that way, and CSC is going against their mandate anyways. Like, I just saw a report made, I can't remember what it's called, but it's to do with like the trans inmates, and saying that they're not getting their human rights met. But the same argument can be said about women. Like, right. CSC's policy is to keep us safe, and that is not what they're doing. So it's a report on vulnerable targets, trans prisoners' safety, the law, and sexual violence in the prison system. But all their arguments in that report can be said about women. Like, CSC is not keeping us safe.
Right.
That is your policy, to keep us safe. And that's why I want a moratorium on the transfers until they can come up with a solution themselves. I'm not giving them the solution because I'm not going to be held responsible for the outcome, and it's their job. I'm not being paid to come up with your solutions, but you need to figure it out. Because you're not following policy, and you're putting people in danger.
Yeah. So, I mean, what can people do to either support your work or to, lobby the government to deal with this, and deal with this in a way that protects women?
Speak out. And I'm happy about that, because since I've been speaking out about it, I found a lot more people are willing to speak up. So the more people that talk about it, then the more people that are going to hear. And if everyone's talking about it, CSC can't just keep on pretending that it's not happening and keep citing Bill C-16 and not make a comment or acknowledge it. And same with Justin Trudeau. The more people that start speaking about it and calling him out on it, he's going to have to take responsibility and show accountability. So I'm hoping to get an account set up as well, so then people can make donations for legal representation. And also I have women from across Canada for the human rights thing. So then for their flight, for all that stuff. So I'm hoping to get that set up.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me about this today, and thank you so much for your work. I mean, it's really making a difference. I mean, this has gone on for way too long, and people have been silent about it for way too long, and it's really scary and dangerous. So we're all really grateful for what you're doing.
Thank you.